So this weekend, I worked on the script and the vows, custom vows for a wedding couple. I'm about to officiate the wedding of a couple who my guests are in their late 50s, early 60s. And when I met with this couple, I remember both of them made a point of telling me that this was their second marriage, that they had both been through divorce before. And it was a joy to work with them and see the hope and the love in their eyes and their enthusiasm for this next adventure in their lives. So that happened this weekend. Then, as many of you know, I prepared the PowerPoint for this service. And as I was leafing through some old photos, I came across the photo of Macy May Thies, Mark Thies's daughter, whose christening I performed earlier this year on Father's Day. And some of you might recall that her story is such that she was born 4 months premature and just a little bit over 1 pound when she was born. So this is the kind of stuff, that I look at and that I deal with in everyday life. And even as I sit here, aware of the fact that I meet with probably a third of you one-on-one, and I'm very much aware of the extent of tragedy and loss that people in this very room have overcome or are even working through, challenges that we're working through in our everyday lives right now. People in this room who have been, who are homeless right now. People in this room who have been diagnosed, who have a loved one who is diagnosed with cancer or another debilitating or chronic illness. People who have survived wars, like in my own family, right? Veterans. So I'm very much aware of this notion of challenge, addiction, pain, health challenges, financial challenges that are going on right now. And what struck me is that, there is this saying, a teaching by Buddha that life is suffering, right? And when I heard this, I felt that there was some truth to it, but it didn't completely resonate with me. What I preferred was what I heard later, which is this idea that in life, pain, challenge, hurdles, obstacles are inevitable, but suffering is not. And that as much as there is a theme in our human experience of obstacle and challenge, of trial, that there is also parallel to that, a really powerful underlying core theme of overcoming, of rising up, of bouncing back. And so it's that theme that I want to focus on today, because the idea is, if in our human experience we're going to own that challenge is inevitable, then we also need to bring forth that in us which can meet that. And so I want to talk today about resilience, which is a chapter in Brene Brown's book. And corresponding to that chapter is another chapter focused on joy and gratitude. And as I shared earlier, I'm going to bring in Shane in a few minutes to bring forth his story of healing and overcoming. So I want to start by talking a little bit about my journey and my understanding of resilience. When I was in high school, I read a book by one of my favorite authors, M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. And similar to this quote by Buddha, he basically said this, and I have this quote here, that life is difficult. This is a great truth, he said, one of the greatest truths. I can tell you, when I read this in high school, I wasn't thrilled with this idea. I remember resisting it and thinking, it doesn't have to be that way. I can get people to do what I want them to do, and I'll be fine, right? I can get life to show up in the way I want it to show up, and I will be fine. And so I resisted it in the beginning, and then I realized how much this was a core to my suffering. And then I really took in the rest of his words in this line here where he says, life is difficult. It's a great truth, one of the greatest truths. But he adds, it is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. Brene Brown said something similar in her book, when she says this: when we lose our tolerance for discomfort, we lose joy. The dark does not destroy the light, it defines it. It's our fear of the dark that casts our joy into the shadows. And so really, what this teaching has brought forth for me over the years is a letting go of this idea that I'm not supposed to be challenged in life, that I'm not supposed to feel pain. And I have noticed that the more that I have come to own that, the more I've been able to be at a certain degree of peace with whatever is going on in my life. But there's something deeper to this, which is that in the facing of this, there's a facing of our vulnerability, of our tenderness, and of our hurt. There's an embracing of the discomfort. And in that, my heart becomes more open, right? When that happens. And when my heart becomes more open, inevitably, it starts to become more open to joy, more open to vibrancy, more open to enthusiasm, the things that were numbed out because I shut down those other things. One of the things that recently happened for me around this topic of resiliency is there was a relationship that I've had with a friend for a time now. And I was very aware of the fact that we had each caused each other a lot of pain over the years. And there was a lot of pull me to this relationship. And I remember saying to this person, our relationship only has so much elasticity, right? So our human relationships, our relationship with outer conditions only has so much elasticity before it wears out, before it breaks. But then I was able to come into a deeper truth in my disappointment, in my sadness over the loss of elasticity in this particular relationship. And what I came to experience within me is that there is one relationship that is eternally elastic, and that's my relationship with Spirit. And in that I was reminded of the parable of the prodigal son, if you might recall that story in the Bible. Here in Unity, we don't take the Bible literally as a literal word of God, but we interpret it allegorically or metaphorically, symbolically. And we take these stories as lessons in our journey. And in the story, basically, the short version is there's a father with a whole lot of wealth. He divides the wealth between his two sons. One takes all the money, goes to a foreign land and squanders it. And the other stays close to home, cares for dad, is around. And the funny thing about the story is the guy who left, the son who left, basically squanders all the money and then comes home empty-handed to his father. And he's not sure how he's going to be received, right? But what happens is, as he's nearing home, his father runs to him with open arms, prepares a banquet for him. And so the way Unity interprets this is that this is an analogy for our return to spirit. This is an analogy that helps us to enter into a deeper knowing that no matter how far we come away from this thing within us, which is the source of our being and of our love and of our joy and of our strength, that we can always return. And when we return, there is a banquet that awaits us, a banquet of infinite strength and reserve and inspiration and creativity and joy. And so this story also reminded me of a story shared by our friend Shane here. And so with that, I'm going to invite Shane to come share his story, which is a reunion of sorts with his father. So thanks, Shane.
So I want to start by saying this is not easy for me to do. Not at all. Public speaking, just in general, is tough for me. And the subject that I'm going to share on is very, very tender and very, very fresh still. So I really appreciate Rev Nhien sharing the quote, "When we lose our tolerance for discomfort, we lose joy." Feeling a lot of discomfort. My biological father left me when I was 2 weeks old. The resulting divorce from him and my mom was pretty brutal, and I was a part of that. Too young to remember the details, but it left its scars. I learned about it when I was about 4 or so. And that's pretty young to learn that, 50% of what was supposed to be my world is not there. And he didn't want kids, and he claimed me as the reason that he was not there. I also learned later on that he almost convinced my mom to abort me. Matter of fact, she was on her way to the clinic and turned around. So I came pretty close to not existing. His name is Jim, by the way. So a few years later, my mom met my stepdad. His name is Clark, and he's a good man, but he was never around. He worked 80, 90 hours a week, and so most of the time I was alone. Literally, I didn't really have any friends, didn't have any siblings. Was just by myself most of the time. Jim died when I was 12, and I remember my mom telling me, and I remember not feeling anything. I think my response was, okay. As time went on, and I didn't have an anchor in my life, I began developing behaviors and thought processes that numbed the emptiness and pain, and I was largely just living in my head. Wasn't experiencing reality, wasn't in the present. Eventually developed addiction, and used that as a coping mechanism. So fast forward a few years. Married a woman and had a very it was a difficult relationship. It was clearly not meant to be, but I wanted it to be because I thought she could take me away from my pain, and she could not. No human being can. 2 years ago, we got divorced, and I hit what was effectively the bottom in my life. At that time, I found 12-step and began working that. And I found a sponsor. And he was the first anchor that I ever had in my life. Began therapy, started dealing with the painful events, but kind of danced around the dad stuff. Didn't want to face that. Fast forward to 6 months ago. Started writing daily gratitude lists in my journal. I journal every morning and thought it might be a good idea. Started praying for humility. Thought that might be a good idea. Turns out, most things pay off. A month ago, I was prompted in my heart to write a letter to Jim. I had talked about him, but I'd never written a letter directly to him. And one of the paragraphs in that letter says, "I don't know where you are now, whether you can see me, hear me. Know that despite what you did by leaving and wanting me dead, you ultimately brought me to life. I will always have a connection to you." And this letter comes down to this, which is very hard for me to write. You are my dad, and I do miss you, and I wish you were here, and I do love you. I cannot hate the man who brought me to life, and I love you, Dad. And I wish you were here to see me now. Maybe you'd be proud of me. 2 weeks ago, here at the U-Nite service, a newcomer came in. Her name is Chris, and she had a daughter. Her name is Allie. I never had a connection with kids. Didn't want kids. Just didn't even really like them. At dinner after the service, Chris and Allie came, and for some reason, Allie latched onto me, and I became her boy. She was clipping things on me. She was playing with my hair and my shirt and talking to me, and I had no idea what to do. After I left, I thought about her a lot. And I realized as the week went on that that little girl softened a part of my heart that had been hard for a very, very long time. 4 days later, through a conversation with a friend, I realized that for the past 2 years I had made my sponsor effectively a father. And that's not his role. And I had to tell him. I was nervous. I was all out of sorts. In the conversation with him, I told him how he's the first man in my life who was stable and cared about me, how I put him in the father role, how I worked to please him the entire time, and that I was dishonest and sorry. And he responded with love and grace, that I didn't owe him an apology. And he told me to do something. He told me to point the desire in my heart for a father towards God. And I cried a lot after that, which also is a very difficult thing for me to do. And I did as he said. I started pointing that empty piece in my heart toward God. And I began feeling a deep, deep sense of peace. And I realize now that this wound in me is beginning to heal. This, by the way, was last weekend. I am beginning to heal. I am becoming much more resilient. I have a deep sense of joy, and I love how Brene separates joy from happiness. Don't necessarily have to be happy to know that I'm okay. I'm extremely grateful for my life. And I do have a dad now, and his name is God. Thank you.
So Shane touched upon a few points that I want to highlight here today regarding our book, what we're reading, and what we're learning together. Here in Unity, we don't really focus on God as a man, God the Father. Our focus is on God as principle, as the universe, as love itself, as life itself. That which is infinite, sweet spirit. We have different names for God, but we don't limit it. And a lot of times we learn that in our process, as we approach the infinite, the divine, we'll do so through whatever face we have been missing, if you will. So there's that piece as we approach spirituality. And the reason we want to bring this up is in her book, Brene Brown basically says this, and she says it specifically to her scientist and atheist friends, which is, hey folks, you know, of all the things that I learned about resiliency, the most important thing is spirituality. The most important piece to being able to bounce back is not our reliance on our outer strength. It's not our reliance on the people even in our lives, on our degrees, on our physical muscle even, but it is our centeredness and belief in a power greater than ourselves that she says is also a belief in a power that is within ourselves, and that is the essence of our own being. And ultimately she shares that for her, spirituality is very broad. It's not limited to one particular dogma, belief system, but one thing that is common to people with resiliency is that they believe in their sense of unity or belonging to life, if you will. Their unity or belonging to the universe. And it is that spirituality that supports us and gives us strength and resiliency and that capacity to bounce back in the world. And then Shane touched on another core piece, which is the next chapter in her book, which is the piece of gratitude and joy. And on this note, I want to share something that Charles Fillmore wrote. And then what we're going to do is, instead of having me talk at you, I'm going to invite you into a guided meditation where we can explore some of these concepts and topics within ourselves. So in the early 1900s, well before Brene Brown wrote this book, co-founder of the Unity movement, Charles Fillmore, wrote in his book, Dynamics for Living, this. In spirit, he says, praise accumulates. In sense consciousness, this faculty is called acquisitiveness. It accumulates material things. But praise opens the portal of the mysterious realm where thought is impregnated with an uplifting, transcendent quality. Every lofty ideal, all the inspiration that elevates and idealizes in religion, poetry, and art originates here. It is the kingdom of the true and real in all things, he says. Praise, which is a form of gratitude, right, for what is in our lives. Praise is the complement of sight and hearing. It is the redemption of weariness. And so with that, I'm going to invite you into a time of meditation. So let's take a moment to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Yeah, get settled in your seats. Take a deep and healing breath. And turn your attention within. Within yourself is the infinite. This eternal life, this infinite capacity for love, for wisdom, this capacity to meet every single challenge of your life with grace and strength and even peace. As you relax your physical body, I invite you to also relax your mental body and allow yourself to become fully receptive to this inner life, this inner strength, what some of us call the Father. As Jesus said, it is the Father through me that does the work. So we allow our outer being to rest in this truth. And within the depths of our own being, how do we connect to this truth? We do so through the acknowledgement of what already is, but that perhaps we were not open to seeing. And so we turn our attention to our lives right now, and we note the blessings that abound, that are already here for us. We give thanks simply for being alive. We might give thanks for our family or our friends. I'm going to invite you to take a moment to turn within to yourself, to just acknowledge 3 things that you're grateful for here in this moment in your life. Perhaps it's a person. Perhaps it's a garden. Perhaps it's music. Allow yourself to fully feel and receive the gift of existence already here. Acknowledge that as you receive these gifts, you are nourishing yourself and your capacity for meeting everyday life. What gifts are in your life today? Allow yourself time to absorb and feel them. Can you feel the gift in the tip of your toes and how it lights you up? Can you feel joy and gratitude move up your legs and power your body? Lift up your heart. Lift up your chin. Allow you to rise and meet this moment. Can you feel how life is already supporting you through everything that is already here? allow yourself to be uplifted by the receiving of your own life here now as we take just a couple minutes together in the silence.